All right, so you guys have sent in some really fascinating stuff about poetry. Like, how are poems actually put together, the
Yeah.
shapes they take, the music you hear in them. That's what we're going to try to unpack today in this deep dive.
Yeah.
It might seem a bit complicated at first, but trust me, these things are crucial for really understanding English literature.
Yeah, and I think, it's really important to understand that the choices poets make, how the poem looks, how it sounds, the structure, form, rhythm, meter, these aren't just random. It's all about crafting a specific experience for you as the reader and getting you to connect with that poem on a deeper level.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with structure and form.
Okay.
Now, I think those two kind of feel similar,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they overlap quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I think a helpful way to think about this is that the structure of a poem is how the poet organizes its different parts, right? It's like maybe they arrange the stanzas in a certain way, or they put ideas next to each other to create a contrast. Like, it's all about emphasis, right?
Oh, yeah. That's a really good analogy. Imagine structure, like an architect's blueprint, deciding where each room goes, how they connect.
Right.
Form, on the other hand, is more about the established rules or patterns a poem follows,
Okay.
like the number of lines in a stanza, the total number of stanzas, whether it rhymes, and if so, what the pattern is for those rhymes.
So the structure is the layout, and the form is kind of like the rule book
Exactly.
that the poet's working with.
Yep.
Okay, I love that. Now let's move on to the music of poetry.
Okay.
Rhythm and meter.
Yeah.
Now, as I understand it, meter is all about the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables
Yes.
within the lines, right?
Right.
And this pattern, it creates the poem's rhythm, like the pace, the feel.
Yeah, it's like the heartbeat of the poem.
Okay.
And to really get a feel for, what stressed and unstressed syllables are, think of a nursery rhyme you probably know. Hickory dickory dock. Say it aloud.
Okay.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. So you can hear how some of those syllables are naturally emphasized a little bit more.
Yeah. The ones like, if you were to bold them, they'd get like a little extra punch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh. So how do these like stressed and unstressed parts, how do they actually work within a poem?
Well, poets organize these stressed and unstressed syllables into repeating patterns, and we call those patterns feet.
Okay.
Think of them as like the basic rhythmic blocks of a line of poetry.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of different types of these feet, each with their own sort of notation, like da-die or da-di.
Okay. Dot beyond dot.
Yeah, it shows the pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables.
Okay. Okay, cool. Tell me about some of these feet. Like, what are the main ones we should know?
Okay, so one of the most common is the iamb, which is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, so da-di-da-di-a. You hear this in words like arise, or in phrases like the sun will rise. Even the famous line, to be or not to be, that is the question.
Oh, wow.
It's full of iambs. It's a very natural, almost conversational rhythm.
So like a gentle tap followed by a strong beat.
Yeah.
That's another one.
Then we have the trochee,
Trochee.
which is the opposite. So stressed syllable followed by an unstressed. So data.
Okay.
Garden, or
Yeah.
the start of the phrase, teacher knows best. Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade famously opens with trochees. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them.
Ah, yes.
Notice how there's a strong emphasis at the beginning of each foot.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely hear that. A strong beginning and a lighter end. It feels almost like a falling rhythm, right?
Exactly, yeah. Then there's the anapist,
Amapist.
which has two unstressed syllables followed by a stressed one. Da, da, da. So words like interruptee or the phrase on the horizon. It's like it's gathering momentum
Okay.
before the beat lands.
Yeah, so it kind of build up to the emphasis.
Precisely. And the last of the four most common ones is the dactyl,
Dactyl.
which is one stressed syllable followed by two unstressed ones. Da, 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 like merrily, or that classic line, 'twas the night before Christmas.
Okay, so we've got iamb, da-da, trochee, diada, anapist, da-da-da, and dactyl diadata.
Uh-huh.
It's like learning a little rhythmic code.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess my question is, why is understanding all this meter stuff important? Like, why should I care?
Okay, that's a really good question. Meter isn't just a fancy technical detail. It actually does some really important work in the poem.
Okay.
So for one thing, poets might change the meter within a poem to draw your attention to a certain line, maybe a line with a really important meaning or message.
Okay, yeah.
If a line suddenly feels rhythmically different from the others, it's worth thinking about why they made that choice. It's almost like a spotlight.
Right, it's like the poem saying, hey, pay attention.
Exactly, yeah. It can even tell you something about characters in a play.
Okay.
Like, for instance, in Shakespeare's plays, upper-class characters often speak in iambic pentameter,
Okay.
which means 5 iambs per line, creating this very regular, formal rhythm,
Oh, wow.
whereas lower-class characters might speak in a more irregular, prose-like way.
So even their rhythm of their speech kind of shows their status.
It does, yeah. It can also give the poem a texture and feel.
Mm-hmm.
Many people find that a consistent meter just makes it sound better when it's read out loud.
Yeah. It gives it that musicality.
Exactly. Think about how a song with a steady beat can be really engaging.
Right. It's satisfying to listen to and you remember it.
Yeah. And beyond just the sound, meter can also create different moods in a poem.
Oh, okay.
A trochaic meter, with its strong initial stress, can feel more forceful and urgent,
Mm-hmm.
while an iambic meter can often feel more natural or conversational.
Right.
So the rhythm can actually contribute to whether a poem feels sad or joyful or even a bit tense.
It's adding to the emotional impact.
Exactly. And finally, meter can actually work with the poem's themes,
Okay.
either emphasizing them or creating a contrast.
Okay.
Like a steady marching rhythm might underscore a theme of inevitability, while a sudden break in the meter could highlight a moment of chaos or change.
Oh.
So thinking about how that rhythm makes you feel can be a really useful way to understand what's happening in the poem. What do you think about how meter might influence your feelings when you read?
If the rhythm's kind of bumpy or unexpected, it might make me feel unsettled or like on edge.
Right?
But if it's smooth, then I might feel more calm, reflective, like it's the soundtrack to what's going on.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It is like the soundtrack. All right, let's switch gears and talk about form.
Okay.
Those rules or patterns that poems follow.
Okay.
Remember, we said this includes stuff like the number of lines, stanzas, how long those stanzas are, and whether there's a rhyme scheme or not.
Yeah. And there seem to be a lot of different forms a poem can take.
Yeah, there are a lot.
Where do we even start?
Well, one of the most famous forms is the sonnet.
Okay.
It's almost like the superstar of forms. And what's interesting is there's actually different types of sonnets, each with a slightly different structure, mainly in how the lines and rhymes are organized.
Okay, let's go into some of these sonnets.
Okay, so the earliest type is the Italian sonnet, also known as the Petrarchan sonnet,
Okay.
which came about in the 14th century and is named after the Italian poet Petrarch.
Mm.
It's made up of 14 lines divided into 2 parts.
Right.
First, an 8-line stanza called an octave, which usually follows an ABA rhyme scheme.
Okay.
Then a 6-line stanza called a sestet, which can have a few different rhyme schemes, but CDE, CDE, and CDC, TDC are common.
Okay, so it DAB, AB, and then CD, CDE, or CDC, CDC.
Yep.
Got it. What's the typical, flow or the point of these two sections?
Often the octave presents an idea, raises a question, describes a problem, and then there's usually a turning point around the 8th line called a volta.
Oh, volta.
Yeah, and then the sestet offers a resolution, a comment, or an answer to what was in the octave.
Okay.
They're often about love, but can explore all kinds of themes. This turning point, it often reflects a shift in the speaker's emotional state or a new angle on the problem. Think of it like the poet's leading you down one path and then subtly guiding you onto another.
Oh, that makes sense. Kind of two-part structure with a shift in the middle.
Yeah.
What about the Shakespearean sonnet?
Okay, well, the Shakespearean sonnet is an adaptation of the Italian form that developed in England, obviously.
Of course.
And Shakespeare was the most famous user of it. It also has 14 lines, but it's structured differently.
Okay.
It has 3 quatrains, which are stanzas of 4 lines each.
Okay.
And it ends with a rhyming couplet, which is a 2-line stanza. The typical rhyme scheme is AB, AB, CD, CD, E, F, E, F, G, G. And remember when we talked about meter, Shakespeare usually wrote these in iambic pentameter.
Oh, right.
So 10 syllables per line with that dédié rhythm.
So a slightly different buildup with those 3 4-line chunks, each with their own rhyming pattern.
Yeah,
And then a final rhyming statement in the couplet.
precisely.
Okay. What about the Miltonic sonnet?
Okay, so the Miltonic sonnet, it's not so much a different structural pattern. It's more about how the poet, John Milton, used the sonnet form.
Okay.
So he sometimes wrote sonnets that focused on internal struggles or religious themes, and he didn't always strictly adhere to the traditional rhyme schemes or have a clear volta.
So it's like a more flexible approach to the sonnet form, focusing more on the content than the rules.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, and then we also have the Spenserian sonnet.
Oh, yes, the Spenserian sonnet, which was created by the 16th century English poet Edmund Spenser.
Mhm.
It takes the structure of the Shakespearean sonnet. So 3 quatrains and a couplet, but uses a linked rhyme scheme. ABA, BCBC, CDCD, EE.
Okay.
It's almost like each stanza picks up a rhyming thread from the previous one, creating this continuous flow,
Oh, wow.
but still has that final couplet like the Shakespearean form.
It's so fascinating how these forms, like, evolve
Yeah.
and how poets adapted them, right?
Mm.
So why would a poet choose to write in sonnet form in the first place?
Well, as we said, sonnets have this huge history, so it can give the poem this sense of weight and tradition. They're also strongly associated with love poetry, especially the Petrarchan sonnet.
Okay.
So if a poet is exploring themes of love, a sonnet brings those associations to mind for the reader.
Yeah, the form itself carries expectations.
Exactly.
Okay. What about other poetic forms that aren't sonnets?
Oh.
What about a villanelle? That sounds a bit complicated.
The villanelle is a French form with a very specific repeating structure.
Right.
It's got 5 terces, which are 3-line stanzas,
Mm-hmm.
followed by a quatrain, which is a 4-line stanza.
Okay.
And what makes it so unique is how the first and third lines of the first stanza are repeated.
Okay.
These lines alternate as the last lines of the next 4 terces, and then they both appear as the last 2 lines of the quatrain.
Wow. There's a lot of repetition in this form.
There is, yeah.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. Dylan Thomas's "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" is a famous villanelle. The first line, "Do not go gentle into that good night," and the third line, "Rage, rage against the dying of the light," are repeated throughout the poem in that alternating pattern.
Okay.
And then they form the final couplet. And it creates this powerful sense of insistence and this cyclical feeling.
I can imagine that repetition really, like, builds intensity, like hammering home the point.
It does, yeah.
What about a ballad? I think those are traditionally songs, like stories, right?
Yeah, exactly. A ballad is a narrative poem, which just means its main purpose is to tell a story.
Okay.
They were traditionally passed down orally, often as folk songs, and they usually follow a fairly simple structure of ABCB rhyming quatrains.
Okay.
There's a distinction between these older folk ballads, which are often anonymous,
Okay.
and then the literary ballad, which is like a written poem in the ballad form.
Okay, so the focus is on storytelling and the rhyming is straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about blank verse? Blank verse always sounds to me like it should rhyme.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trick. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. So it has that consistent rhythm of 10 syllables per line with the unstressed pattern, but there's no set rhyme scheme.
Okay.
It's often used in plays like Shakespeare or long poems like Paradise Lost because it sounds natural and speech-like.
Okay, unrhymed iambic pentameter. That clears it up. So it's structured, but without the rhyme.
Exactly.
Okay, what about an ode?
Okay, an ode is a lyric poem,
Okay.
which means it expresses feelings and thoughts and often has a formal, sometimes elevated tone.
Okay.
It's typically used to praise or celebrate a person, object, or an idea. Think of Keats's Ode to a Nightingale.
Okay.
Odes can vary quite a bit in their stanza form and line length,
Okay.
and they don't always follow a strict rhyme scheme,
Okay.
but they often have a regular meter.
So a poem of praise, maybe reflection, often with like a sense of seriousness.
Yeah, grandeur.
Okay, and finally we have the epic poem,
Okay.
which I think of as really long, like heroes and big events.
Yeah, that's pretty much the essence of it. An epic poem is a long narrative poem
Mm-hmm.
that tells the story of a hero's journey or a significant event.
Okay.
Like, think of the Odyssey, Beowulf.
Okay.
They are usually grand in scope,
Mm-hmm.
exploring themes of heroism, fate, destiny of a nation.
So length and a focus on important stories.
Exact.
Okay, we've covered a lot of forms.
We have.
Let's talk about rhyme and rhyme scheme.
Okay.
So it seems like poets have a whole world of rhyming options, right?
Yeah, they do.
Like, should they rhyme? Should they not rhyme? What kind of patterns?
Yeah, it's a big decision.
Yeah.
You know, a poet's choice to use rhyme or not is a fundamental decision.
Yeah.
That affects the entire sound and feel of the poem.
Okay.
And if they choose to rhyme, there's loads of different patterns they can use.
Right.
Some poets even develop a particular rhyme scheme they favor.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like their signature.
Exactly, yeah. And remember, it's not just about rhymes at the end of the lines.
right.
We also have internal rhyme and half rhyme.
Yes.
Internal rhyme happens when words rhyme within the same line,
Okay.
like in the cat sat on the mat,
Okay.
or between words in different lines but not at the end.
Okay.
Half rhyme, also called slant rhyme, is when the last consonant sounds are the same but the vowel sounds are different,
Okay.
like shape and keep.
Okay.
It creates a kind of near rhyme.
Okay.
A subtle echo that can sometimes feel unsettling or ambiguous.
So like an almost rhyme that doesn't quite, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
What about the common patterns of rhyme at the end of lines?
Well, one very common rhyme scheme, especially in four-line stanzas or quatrains,
Okay.
is ABB,
Okay.
which is an alternating rhyme scheme where the first and third lines rhyme and the second and fourth lines rhyme.
Okay.
Then there's AVB,
Okay.
which is called couplet rhyme scheme, where you have pairs of rhyming lines,
Right.
like the Shakespearean sonnet ending,
Oh, right.
that gives that sense of finality.
ABA alternating. AABB couplets. What else?
You'll often see ABCB, which is a simple four-line rhyme where only the second and fourth lines rhyme.
Okay.
There's the ballad stanza, ABABCBC, which is used in that ballad form we talked about, so a more complex pattern.
Okay.
And then there's monorhyme,
Monorhyme.
where every single line in a stanza or even the whole poem rhymes.
Wow.
And if it's a three-line stanza, it's called a triplet.
Okay.
Like, for instance, if every line ended with a word rhyming with cats.
Oh, wow.
So that's monorhyme.
That's like a real driving sense of, like, unity.
Yeah, definitely.
So why do poets bother with all this? Like, what is the purpose?
Yeah, rhyme isn't just about making the poem sound musical,
Okay.
although it helps. The use of rhyme schemes can link ideas or highlight certain words.
Okay.
For instance, couplets can give a sense of closure or resolution.
Okay.
More generally, rhyme gives a structural framework,
Mm-hmm.
helping to organize ideas and create balance and flow.
Okay.
And sometimes when a poet breaks the rhyme scheme, that can draw attention to a line or idea,
Oh, wow.
creating emphasis by messing up the pattern.
Oh, that's really cool. I never thought about that. To really see how all this comes together, can we look at a specific poem?
Yeah, let's look at Keats' When I Have Fears.
Okay.
It's a great example of how structure, form, rhythm, and rhyme work together. Right away, we can see the rhyme scheme. A, B, A, P, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G tells us it's a Shakespearean sonnet.
Okay, so A, B, Abe, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. That's the 3 4-line stanzas and the final rhyming couplet.
Exactly. And within those lines, Keats uses a bunch of imagery related to harvesting in nature.
Okay.
You know, words like gleaned, teeming brain, high-piled books, garners, and ripened grain.
Okay. Yeah.
These bring up themes of time passing and the idea that his creative potential might not be realized before death, which is a big theme in his poetry.
So the imagery kind of fits with the themes.
Yeah.
How does the form of the sonnet itself play into that meaning?
Well, by using the Shakespearean sonnet form, which has a clear progression through the 3 quatrains and final couplet,
Okay. Yeah.
Keats can kind of explore his fears in stages
Okay.
and then offer a concluding thought.
Right.
The 3 quatrains let him show different aspects of his anxieties.
Okay.
The fear of dying before he's written all he can, the fear of not fully experiencing love, and the fear of losing the beauty of the world.
Okay.
And the final couplet gives a kind of acceptance.
So the structure helps to organize his thoughts.
Yeah.
What about the rhythm of the poem?
All the lines in When I Have Fears have 10 syllables
Okay.
and are written in iambic pentameter, that Didier rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in the first 4 lines, when I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, before high-piled books in charactery hold like rich, garners the full ripened grain.
Wow. Yeah.
You can hear that pattern.
I can hear it.
This consistent rhythm gives this sense of order and stability,
Right.
which is kind of interesting when you think about the chaotic feelings he's expressing.
Yeah, it's like this steady beat underneath all these big questions.
It is, yeah. And also notice how the first line, when I have fears that I may cease to be, is made up of mostly single-syllable words.
Yeah.
This contributes to a feeling of sincerity.
Yeah.
Like he's being honest and straightforward about his fears.
Yeah, that simplicity at the start really does that.
Exactly. And as we said, the poem moves from those expressions of fear in the first 12 lines to a more accepting reflection in the last couplet.
Okay.
Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink.
Wow.
And the dactyl of unreflecting love then on the shore
Yeah.
acts as a visual pause,
Oh, wow.
marking that change in the thought. So in When I Have Fears, we see how the form of the sonnet with its specific rhyme scheme and the iambic pentameter is used to explore anxiety and end with contemplation.
It's incredible how all those things, the structure, the form, the rhythm, the rhyme, it all worked together to make this poem so powerful.
It does, yeah. They're all choices that contribute to the impact and how we experience the poem.
So for anyone listening, what's the key takeaway here?
Take the time to really look at how a poem is put together.
Yeah.
Notice the lines, the stanzas, the overall shape. See if you can find a rhythm pattern, what rhymes there are. By looking at these things, you start to see how the poet is shaping your experience and communicating their
That's
ideas.
like learning the secret language.
It is, yeah.
And on that note, here's something for you to think about.
Yeah.
How might a poet break those rules, play with the rhythm, maybe to show chaos or surprise the reader? Something to consider as you explore more poetry.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
My pleasure.